Uh, Today, the learning objective are going to be directed to understand first the process of learning and memory. We know that we have been, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we have been working and studying from home. And there are aspects of learning and memory that I would like to explain before we go and dive into the aspects of how to create an area that is enticing and is effective for you to learn and actually also to work. So the first objective that I'm going to have for today's presentation is to go in a brief discussion and summary about biological structures that are involved in learning and memory. Then go into very simple terms, go into the biology of learning and memory, and then that will set the basis to go into how we can develop effective learning and working spaces, what to do and what not to do. So our brain is a very complex organ. Up to today, in the 21st century, there's many areas and many aspects of the brain that we still poorly understand. However, we have advanced in the knowledge of the brain, and we have actually, based on, unfortunately, diseases or lesions to the brain, learned how specific brain regions functions and relate those functions to a phenotype, which means a presentation of our behavior or how we process information. So in general terms, and this is a very simplistic way, there is going to be references at the end that you want to be welcome to go into more details. And also I encourage you that I hope this serve as a introduction so that you go and it motivates you to go and look for more information. So this is going to be a very general description of the brain. So the human brain can basically divide it in four main regions. And you can see this one in different colors here. So the first region that I'm gonna talk to you, and we refer to them as lobes, is the frontal lobe. Is the frontal because it's the anterior part of the brain, is actually what we have here in front of our head. And we know that these actually contain regions and networks that are required for our executive function, meaning the regulation of emotion, planning, reasoning, and problem solving. Is the area that actually takes up to 25 years to mature. It's what we call, the kids are maturing, is getting more responsibilities, is making better judgment. That area of the brain is the last area of the brain that developed in humans. And it takes a process from the baby, child, pre-adolescent, adolescent, young adult, and then adult in those that 25 years and older. And it continues, even though we think that develop up to the 25 years of age, hormone changes or hormones that affect the brain also have impact in how this brain region works. Just to give you a relationship that you can learn and associate this function, this is the brain region that you use when someone in the street, you go in the highway and someone cut you off and make a bad movement, and then you take the time to hold and not say anything. Or you are in a very difficult situation and you reason how to respond and how to deal with the situation. That means that you are using your frontal lobe. Posterior to the frontal lobe, divided by these central succuls that is in this area, is what we call the parietal lobe. And the parietal lobe is the sensory part of the brain. It's actually an area that integrates sensory information, including touch, temperature, pressure, and pain. It's the area where you can register a smell and actually try associate it with a memory. This is actually our sensory center. In between them, in this central region is what is also called the movement core or the cortex. And this area of the motor skills require hold some memories in this central region of the brain, which actually demark the areas of the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe. So this is the motor cortex, is known as the motor cortex. Moving posterior is the occipital lobe, and that is actually the visual cortex. It's actually where all our visual processing takes place. It's the area from our stimulus in the eyes go all the way back to our back of the brain, and that's where the images are processing. That's how any defects in the occipital lobe will actually distort how you can actually interpret depth, distance, location, and identify specific objects. And that's the main actually function of that occipital lobe, just the visual processing. Below these four lobes that I'm going to talk to you, I want to make emphasis on this area here that is called the cerebellum or small brain. So the cerebellum is actually the area, another area that takes time to develop. And like the frontal lobe, the cerebellum develop later after birth. That's why the babies don't, when they're born, they don't walk right away. The cerebellum is still developing in addition to other brain regions. I just want to emphasize that I'm simplifying the information I'm giving to you, but the cerebellum is the one that you use when you learn how to run a bike. And that memory is stored, that motor memory is stored with that interaction between the cerebellum and the motor cortex that is up here. And the cortex, I continue making association with the cortex because we're going to talk about it in terms of learning and memory. This area down here is actually the brainstem, and is actually very, very important, and is the most primitive area of the brain. Is the areas that control autonomic functions. Is the brain regions that control your lungs, your heart, and those are things that you don't take in consideration, but is actually being processed and controlled by your brain. That's why when someone hit back the head, hit back in the head, there is a high potential that this area can be damaged, and immediately the heart or the lungs can stop and that person die. So that's why this area is so important. And again, it's one of the primitive area shared with all our related mammals in the animal kingdom. The most important area, or actually the physiological relevant region that we're going to be talking about today, is the temporal lobe. Is this region here that is separated from the frontal and the parietal lobe by this lateral sulcus that is here. And this temporal lobe is actually what dictates the processing of sensory information necessary for hearing, recognizing language, and forming memories. This is where the stimulus and the informations come in, and then we can learn. It contains a specific brain region we're going to talk about in detail, a little bit in detail in the next slide. But the hippocampus is the region that is contained in this temporal lobe, and is the one that is one of the areas associated and very important for the brain to process memory, learning, and also emotions. So in general, as you can see, we can divide the brain in specific regions. And these regions are associated with a specific function. So there is the relationship between anatomy and function. The frontal lobe for attention planning, the touch and taste and smell in the parietal lobe, and then you have your vision center movement coordination in the cerebellum, and then the memory processing and emotion here in the temporal lobe. Let's now cut the brain. The brain has two hemispheres that are connected by the what is known the corpus callosum. So we have two hemispheres that are actually joined by this region, and we can separate it. So let's open the brain now. If we open the brain by cutting through the corpus callosum, that is this region here, now we can see the hippocampus. So this hippocampus is inside that temporal lobe. So in the process of learning and memory, now we are going into the physiology of learning and memory. What happens? We receive an information or in stimulus. Like today that I'm giving you some information, that information is actually activating the cells, the neurons in this area of the hippocampus. And that hippocampus get activated, and the information due to the synaptic activity, that electric activity that happens between the neurons due to their activation, that is in reference to the stimulus that you are receiving, it circulates in this area of the temporal lobe that also is known as the limbic system. And in that process, while you are collecting that information, and hopefully what you are doing today, as I am speaking to you, you are generating, by the stimulation of these brain regions, you are generating what we know as working memory. And working memory refers to that temporary storage of information that can be used in few hours, few days, weeks, sometimes even months, but it's temporary. It will not actually go into the second component of memory, that is the long-term memory. And the long-term memory refers to the unlimited storage of information. It's what you learn and the capacity of using that information. So it's the learning process and then goes into the long-term memory. So the working memory is temporary. The long-term memory is what you remember for years after you learn it. And in order to go into long-term memory, that information that is circulating here, that activation that started in the parahippocampus and the hippocampal region, has to be stored in the neocortex and the cortex. So all your memories are actually stored in your in the cortical regions of your brain. And there is the marker here by the neocortex and then all your cortical regions. So that mass of the brain actually holds your memories that goes and pass from working memory to long-term memory. Remember that the distinction is that the working memory is that temporary memory for hours, that you can hold for hours, days, probably weeks, sometimes even months, but then that's it. You lost that information. You lose that information. The long-term memory is what you learn. And once you learn it, it's stored in that cortical region. What we want to achieve with our children and us at work is to actually move the information we gain from working memory to long-term memory. And that actually can take place if in the learning process, the individual and the environment are conducive to do that transition from working memory to long-term memory. So that process requires that the person is committed to learn, that pay attention to the information, making connection between something that is known, already known, with the new information. For example, you can something that how I explain how the neurons work and how they are connected. If you take a Christmas tree and you have all these lights, once you plug that station of lights, you know that if one is off, sometimes the whole change of lights will go off. But then if you change that one, it will then always go connected. So that's what happened in a brain, let's say in conditions like Alzheimer's disease, that one neuron that was actually sending information to other neurons die, and then the other ones get disconnected. The more those lights of those neurons die, the more disconnection or the more lack of lights are going to be on that extension of lights. So associating something that you already knew to a new information will also contribute to move working memory to long-term memory. So practicing that information. So is how you continually use that information. So you repeat the information. I remember when I was a child and I was trying to study for a test, I will be repeating and repeating and practicing in math, for example. You have to practice do different exercises many times. So practice, attention, connecting dots, connecting something new with previous knowledge will help do the transition from working memory to long-term memory. But as I mentioned, the environment and the individual are required to be in sync in order to move that memory from working to long-term memory. So I'm going to use Beaton's 5 key designs principle to describe what are the things that are important to have in that environment that is crucial for learning. One component is centered on the individual. So how you engage that individual, your child, to actually be active part in the learning process. What are the things that the student is interested, your child is interested? What are the things that he or she likes? In math, is social studies, how you can integrate those activities so that the student, the child, in this case, your child, is still motivated. You, as an individual in your work, what are the things that drive you, and how you can be engaged, motivated, have autonomy to make decisions on how to regulate your environment at work. That is really important in order to create that effective environment for learning and memory. How the student is a participant in that process. And then how you can create that environment to be conducive for learning, to avoid distraction, noise, controlling behaviors, having an adequate behavior, creating the ambient so that is conducive for motivation to learn, and create an area that is comfortable for the student to learn. You don't want the student to be in an environment that is too noisy and cold. You want the perfect temperature. You want a quiet space that it helps to the student to concentrate in the material that it needs to take place. So briefly, here is what I'm talking about. At your house, you can create areas that are dedicated exclusively for learning. And you can engage your child in how to decorate and what are the areas, what are the things, the colors, the shapes, the words that student, that child like, and how that student make the decision to use them. So you make your child be participant in the process to establish that area of learning. And then you can have, if you have 2 kids, you can create distinctions between the kids because of the age that they have. You can have a small area for your younger child and then a more grown-up area for your older child. And then but it's important to make them part of the decision of how that space that you're going to separate in your house is going to look like. If you don't have enough space in your house, you can also use your garage. And that is good because then sometimes if they cannot concentrate inside the house, just by going into the garage, it will be an area that could help the student to dissociate the house with with something outside the house. And in that way, put that little brain in a position, in a timing to learn. I know that here in Michigan, that most of our garage are not isolated for temperature. So it might be no ideal, especially during the winter area, but it's something to consider. You can create a small spaces. You don't have to have, you don't have a big house with cardboard. You can allow to create that space that is unique for that child, and allow that child to organize the area so that the student can, the child can have autonomy in how that space look like and what are the things that this student needs in order to be successful. So you can use a cardboard, and what you can see here is that you have a lot of light. That is very important. You have seen in all the pictures how much light is important, how to keep the area brightened and personalized for that student. But that is the same for you as a parent if you're working from home. You have to create that space that is open, that has light, that is created in an area that it put you in the mood, if you will, to work efficiently and to be motivated to work, that you go to work. Something that you notice, I hope you notice in the previous picture, is that if the kids and the adult here, you have to dress for the occasion. Even though you are at home, you have to establish a routine so that you dress. You don't go to the school in your pajamas. Well, I hope not, or work in your pajamas. So you have to dress for the occasion. You have to establish a routine that you dissociate being in the house by being at school, even though both things are happening in the same place. What you need to avoid is the distraction. Even though you can separate a space for the kids, you want to avoid distraction, having toys around or having an area that is very crowded. You don't want that. You don't want also to overstimulate your kid, because that also could serve as a distraction. So keep the area clean, organized, and only enough information that can put the student in the mood, in the situation that area is for learning. Don't wake up and start using the same bed that you sleep to work. That's, your brain is going to be then either being sleepy by your working, or then when you try to sleep, is going to be, your brain going to be trying to work. So dissociate that space, that bedroom is very important and key to have an effective area for learning and memory. Technology is very important. Don't take hold of the cell phone from your kid, or don't sit them in front of the TV. That will be too much temptation to get distracted. And that happens to humans too. To adults too, of course, human, but adults too. You have to avoid being sitting in front of areas or having that distraction, either the telephone or the TV. So, and also you have to create that schedule where you can create for you and your kids some itinerary where you have the space to work and the kids also time to work. I know that this is easier said than done, but you have to create that schedule together with your kids in a conversation. Create the space, create the itinerary, how you're going to follow it during the day. Have a lunch time, have dinner time. Make sure that you guys stick to that schedule. It's very important, and respect the space for your kids and you as you work from home. So in summary, the important aspect of creating a learning and working environment is to develop your purposeful space. Get ownership on that space. Allow an autonomy to the kids to develop their own space, their own learning space, because they're going to be more motivated to learn. Light, brighten the space. Light is very important to stimulate the brain. We need, when you go at night to sleep, you want to do the opposite. When you want it to be alert, you want to have a lot of light. Quiet and avoid distraction. Even create a do not disturb sign that your kids can tell you not to go to that space, or that they can go to the space that you're working. Develop and establish a regular work schedule, a school schedule. That's very important, including breakfast, dressing up in the morning, breakfast together, go to work or school, then have lunchtime, then continue to work in the afternoon, and then know when to stop. Because we are at home, we can sometimes try to work even hours that we didn't used to work before. So establish a schedule and discuss that with your kids so you are in agreement. Dress for the occasion, change. Don't just continue because you are at home with with the clothes that with your pajamas, with what you went to sleep. Try to dress to the occasion and stay away from this technology, from the distractions that can take your attention away from what is important. And that is include also browsing in the internet. I know we do everything in the internet, so it's very easy to go and let me see what is in the news or things that's like that can shift your attention away, and then you have to come back then to activate your brain again and put it in the right settings to learn again. So avoid those distractions. So if you want to learn more, here are some of the relevant references, articles that I used to develop this presentation, and the figures and the pictures that I presented today were taken from this website. I want to acknowledge that this is only for educational purposes. So here is the link from those pictures that I used to prepare the presentation. So with that, we can go to questions if there are any questions.
Thank you, Doctor. That was an awesome presentation. That was really cool. Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Vega? If not, I have a question I would like to ask you personally.
Yeah.
So
go ahead.
So one of the things when I was listening to your presentation that I was thinking of, like, obviously you want to put your phone away. You want to obviously not be working in front of the TV. I think that's definitely something that we all know and understand, but we don't do well. But when one of the things you were talking about is, don't get distracted online. How do you personally try to keep those distractions out of your own work? And is there any tactics that you've found useful in trying to keep yourself from, oh, I have a hard thing to do. Let me go through a dozen news websites. I'm asking for a friend, clearly. That's not me at all. So asking for a friend. So
yeah, I know. And I want to be honest, I also battle with that too. There's a lot of information coming up, and there's a lot of situations, especially in the pandemic, that the news are constantly changing and you want to keep up to date, right? So there is a battle there for attention in this world that we are living in, that there's so many information out there that it's easy to get distracted. In my case, what I do is that I set up goals for the day. For me, it's very important to set up goals for the day and for the week. So in that way, I have that checklist that I have to finish. And if I don't finish those, then I know that I'm gonna feel guilty, because then I'm taking away from my family, from my hobby, from my other things that I want to do.
Oh yeah.
So developing a checklist of specific short-term goals for the day and for the entire week is one way that I use to keep be productive and to avoid distractions.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes perfect sense. Because I actually use there's a program that I use personally called Freedom, which will shut down sites that I keep going back to, which I've found like is super helpful. And the real devil of it is that it's the really the hard stuff that you get most distracted from, because that's the one that demands the most of your attention.
Let me use your question to add something that I didn't mention during the presentation.
Sure.
And is parents that have children with, or one child or children with attention deficit disorder. It at home is going to be very difficult. So because there is a distraction, is now outside of the environment where they were used to go to learn. So now allowing those children to be in that moment, paying attention and to be concentrating what they have to do in a different environment is very difficult. So what you need to do is to actually create that in a schedule with the kid, so that the kid has times in between to allow themselves to liberate that energy. So you can do 20 minutes of reading or 20 minutes of being in one class, and then give 10 minutes or 15 minutes so that the kid can run around or can be distracted. Then 20 more minutes, and make a structure taking in consideration the input from the kid, so that there is ownership in that schedule. And when the child don't follow the schedule, then you can say, hey, we agree on this. What is going on? You were part of the decision and you are not following. How we can modify, how we can change the time. Being flexible is very important.
Yeah, I think that ownership is the biggest aspect of that, because your instinct, especially for a child, is to say, well, just do the thing. And you're like, well, that's not how it works, right? Like we don't respond well to that when we're commanded to do stuff. Why would a kid respond well to that?
Yep.
So one thing I did want to mention, and obviously at any time, if you want to just type your questions in the chat, we can take them that way. But in the chat, we have a link to a survey from the Michigan Center of Contextual Factors in Alzheimer's Disease, to be part of the participant research pool. When we post this to Facebook, it will also be in the Facebook notes, and you can you can fill out that questionnaire to be a part of the participant research pool for Alzheimer's disease. Because the MCC FAD, I see why you guys use an acronym, is doing really great work in Alzheimer's in West Michigan and in the whole state. And we're really looking for, and they're looking for more participants for their pool, so that way they can have a much more representative sample of the population rather than people that are only dealing with this disease. So I just wanted to make sure that we all knew that. And if you are interested, just to click the link and go through all of the steps to do so.
Thank you very much for that. And I wanted to add that this directory that we are developing is for those interested to learn more about clinical research and clinical trials. It's not that you're going to participate in a research, but it's actually allow us to identify individuals that are willing to learn more about clinical trials. And also, is, as Steven said, is very important for us, like for Latinos, and to have a diverse group of people that participate in clinical trials so that we are all represented. So thank you for adding that.
All right. Well, if there's no more questions, we do have our Spanish language session coming up lickety split. So that will be at 4 o'clock today. And I'd like to thank you all for coming. And thank you again, Dr. Vega. I learned a lot in that presentation. That was really good. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to be part of the awesome mission that Grand Rapids Public Library does.